All right,
Got it and lost it.
we still got folks trickling in, but we're about 10 minutes over, so we'll get started for the sake of time.
Now we lost.
Also, for the sake of time, as we discussed this morning, this afternoon is going to be looking at processes and really how these guiding principles we come up with will shape this corridor. So, with that, Will, over to you.
All right, welcome back, guys, for the lunch. I know we're still a little short, and maybe the lunch facilities around the area weren't quite ready for the crowd that we gave them today, but do want to try to get back on schedule and kind of keep it moving. The first thing on the agenda is to show the Wekiva Parkway video. We took some liberty of getting some updated drone footage and a little bit of a voice.
Florida lawmakers have created the CORES task forces to preserve the integrity of our natural resources and maintain the identity of each region. This is no small task, but it is a critical component of the CORES program. The CORES task forces might consider looking to the Wekiva Parkway for the successful implementation of guiding principles and how the Wekiva task force used co-location to achieve their goals. Co-location is the introduction of new infrastructure, roadway, bicycle paths, transit facilities, or utilities on the right-of-way of existing infrastructure. Co-location can be carried out in many ways, and examples of co-location are not exclusive to the Wekiva Parkway. The guiding principles you as task force members develop will serve as a vital foundation for the CORES program, reflecting the values and ideals of our diverse state. Let's take a look at the Wekiva Parkway. Wekiva Task Force developed 18 guiding principles, striking a careful balance between preserving the precious resources of the area and addressing the infrastructure needs of the future. The 18 guiding principles are the items the task force considered necessary to optimize construction through a sensitive area of beautiful green landscapes and pristine wetlands. One of the Wekiva task force's guiding principles was for the design to follow where feasible existing road alignments through environmentally sensitive areas. In other words, to co-locate wherever possible. Section 6 and 7A of the Wekiva Parkway utilize the existing State Road 46 as frontage road with an elevated main line. An additional guiding principle, suggested by the Wekiva Task Force, was focused on preserving and protecting the Wekiva River Basin. Shared use paths are being used to connect with a system of trails throughout the county just east of the Wekiva River, another example of co-location. A guiding principle focused on wildlife preservation, specifically recommending to have bridges and adequate barriers as often as practical to provide for adequate wildlife passages. Using this guiding principle, the design team included over 7,500 feet of wildlife bridging on the Wekiva Parkway and adjacent service road. These bridges provided enhanced wildlife connectivity at two significant crossing locations. To further ensure wildlife is protected, the design team included barriers to direct wildlife to these crossing points. Similar to the Wekiva Task Force, the CORES Task Force guiding principles will not only guide the corridor evaluations and project development and environment phase, but also shape specific design features like the use of innovative construction techniques. Traditional construction calls for two footprints in wetland areas, a temporary structure that is used to build a permanent structure. The Wekiva Parkway guiding principles were applied to design and constructability in order to allow for the natural flow of water and wetlands by implementing top-down construction. With top-down construction, one segment of the roadway is built and then used as the platform to construct the next segment. This alleviates the need to have a double footprint. The Wekiva Parkway was only the 4th project in the state to utilize a balanced cantilever to build out rather than alongside, all part of the guiding principles set forth at the beginning of the project. Now it is your turn. The guiding principles this task force will create are important, not only to the success of the CORES program, but to the future of our state.
Thank you, Will. Again, Jennifer Stoltz. So yes, we want to talk about all of the modes because this is a multimodal, multi-use corridor. So we will go through the multiple modes, including rail, transit, and trails. One of the objectives is to advance construction of regional corridors to accommodate multiple modes of transportation and infrastructure. So with that, we will go through each of these. Okay, so the existing rail infrastructure within the study area will provide a critical link to business markets locally and regionally across the state and nation. Existing rail lines within the study area are operated by CSX Transportation, Florida Northern Railroad, and Florida Midland Railroad. Both Florida Northern and Florida Midland Railroads are short lines which interchange with the CSX line, and Florida Northern Railroad has 2 separate branch lines. CSX Transportation is designated, their line is designated as a Strategic Intermodal System, or SIS, railway corridor, while the western branch line of Florida Northern Railroad is a Strategic Growth Railway corridor. The rail companies own the track and rights-of-way, terminals, maintenance facilities, and administrative buildings. Within the study area, there are approximately 158 total track miles, and CSX has about 75.5 track miles and 36 at-grade crossings with state and local roads. About 22 miles of CSX line have double tracks in several sections. Florida Northern Railroad has 81.2 track miles and 41 at-grade intersections. CSX interchanges with the East Branch of Florida Northern Railroad line in Ocala, and Florida Northern Rail West Branch line interchanges with CSX line in Newberry. CSX has a maintenance yard in Wildwood, and Florida Midland Railroad, which spurs off of CSX in Wildwood, has a 1.38 track miles. These rail systems move freight. The passenger service was discontinued in the late 1980s. The Ocala Union Station, once used by Amtrak Passenger Rail, was listed in the National Register of Historic Places in 1997 and is currently used as a station for intercity and local bus service. Major commodities transported by the rail system are non-metallic minerals, steel and scrap, lumber and wood products, building supplies, paper, plastics and energy products, food and processed products, oil and oil products, coal, and chemicals. According to the Federal Rail Administration, or FRA, inventory report, there are about 15 CSX train movements each day and 2 Florida Northern Railroad trains each day. In 2019, there were 4 reported highway rail accidents. Okay, moving on to the existing transit infrastructure. So in this project area, we have buses on fixed routes and paratransit, which provides demand response rides without fixed routes or timetables. Marion County and Citrus County have fixed route service available, while Levy County and Sumter County do not have fixed route buses. Additionally, we have 2 interregional bus service routes along US 98 and I-75 with bus stops in Chiefland, Crystal River, and Ocala. These interregional bus routes are privately operated by GMG Transport, Greyhound Megabus, and Red Coach. In 2018, public transportation in the study area provided 704,725 fixed route revenue miles of service, equating to 43,191 hours of revenue service. In the same year, paratransit provided 3,263,371 revenue miles of service, equating to 2,865,335 revenue hours. Vehicle revenue miles and hours are both critical service measurements and record the distance that public transportation vehicles travel while in service and for how long they operate in service. There are 95,513 people in the service areas for the fixed route bus service in this study area, mostly in the more urban areas. And the service area's population for paratransit includes the 4-county study area population. In 2018, public transportation provided 476,577 fixed route bus trips and 124,121 demand response trips. Passenger trips are counted each time they board the vehicle, no matter how many vehicles they use to get to and from their origin and destination. Bus systems have passenger stations, stops, maintenance facilities, parking lots, and administrative buildings. Okay, moving on to our trail infrastructure. Within the study area, we have 719.5 miles of existing recreational trails, which include both the shared use non-motorized trail or Sun Trail, or other land trails within the Florida Greenways and Trails system. There are 74.6 miles of existing Sun Trail and about 173 miles of identified Sun Trail gaps, which are in various stages of planning, design, and construction. Of the 173 miles, 67 miles are either fully or partially funded for construction, and 106 miles are not currently funded. Trails in the study area include the Van Fleet State Trail, Withlacoochee State Trail, Denellen Trail, Marjorie Harris Carr Cross Florida Greenway, Nature Coast State Trail, Withlacoochee Bay Trail, and various other land trails. These trails provide Florida's residents and visitors with high-quality multi-use trail experience and regional multimodal transportation options. Recreational opportunities include hiking, biking, skating, horseback riding, geocaching, picnicking, and wildlife viewing, as well as environmental and cultural education. The trail corridors have Americans with Disability Act, or ADA, accessible public facilities and park amenities, which enhance the visitor experience and increase access to recreational opportunities. The trail networks in the study areas are highly used. For instance, Florida Department of Environmental Protection estimated that nearly 98,500 users took part in outdoor recreation in the Cross Florida Greenway between July 2018 and June 2019. Okay, Mr. Chairman, that is my presentation.
Thank you, Jennifer.
All right, thank you, Jennifer. Next,
Hey, Will,
yes, sir.
Ken's got a question or comment?
Oh, yes, sir.
I just wanted to add to the plethora of wonderful trail opportunities. The Florida National Scenic Trail passes through this area, and it's one of 11 national scenic trails in the whole country. And so we've been able to close gaps in the Florida National Scenic Trail with DOT's helps, including a bridge over the Withlacoochee River. So anyway, this is a wonderful asset that exists up through the 3 tracks of the Withlacoochee State Forest, the Cross Florida Greenway, and then 2 prongs within the Ocala National Forest. That and one of the justifications the DOT built the land bridge over I-75 was for the Florida National Scenic Trail. So thank you.
Thank you, Kent. I'll add that to my notes.
Yep, didn't mean to rush anybody, but any other comments? Okay. All right, so we talked last meeting about bringing some traffic information to you. So what we're getting ready to show you now is traffic. We modeled the whole state, and we focused on the area of this task force. So with that, Barbara Davis, who's our Toll Studies and Express Lane Development Administrator, will come up and kind of share some of that data with you.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Will. I'm Barbara Davis. I'm with Florida's Turnpike Enterprise, and I'm going to be presenting on our statewide traffic forecasting approach and on 2018 existing traffic conditions in the study area. And here's the agenda for my presentation. I'll start out describing the statewide model. This is our tool that we're using to prepare the traffic forecast for the CORES corridors. And then I'll identify the model's major data inputs. And then I'll provide an overview of existing traffic conditions in the study area. and wrap up with a summary of major points. The traffic evaluation will be conducted using a consistent methodology. The approach uses one travel demand model that has statewide coverage. This statewide model has been validated to a base year 2015 using nationally accepted processes. Validation means that the model is producing estimated traffic volumes that concur with observed traffic counts. The statewide model uses multiple data inputs. The major data inputs that influence the model outputs are land use, specifically population and employment, and subcategories thereof, and the roadway network, which includes attributes such as number of lanes for the major roadways in the study area. Using these data inputs, the model produces estimated daily traffic. The population and employment data in the statewide model are to the greatest extent consistent with local adopted plans. So for counties that are within an MPO area, the land use data comes from the adopted regional model that is used by the respective MPO in that area. And for counties outside of the MPO area, the land use comes from data sources that are used extensively by local governments in Florida. So specifically, the population data comes from the University of Florida Bureau of Economic and Business Research. Employment data for the base year comes from the Bureau of Economic Analysis, and employment for the future year will be coming from Woods and Pool Economics. Existing traffic conditions were evaluated using FDOT traffic counts for 2018. Annual average daily traffic on a roadway is traffic during a typical day. So this is traffic for the entire year, including special events and holidays. Annual average daily traffic doesn't always tell the story of an area's traffic conditions. For example, during peak seasons, our high tourist seasons or presence of seasonal residents, traffic volumes can be much higher. This map shows annual average daily traffic that's been adjusted for peak season traffic, and you can see the dark colors represent higher traffic volumes in the area. In order to identify the worst traffic conditions during a day, we also look at peak hour, peak direction traffic. In the study area, the heaviest peak hour traffic volumes are along State Road 200, I-75, and on Florida's Turnpike. So just to wrap up with the major points, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot truck traffic. When looking at traffic counts in and around our study area, we can also look at truck traffic. As expected, actual truck traffic counts are highest on the interstate and on the Turnpike, and you can see that again represented by the dark colors, the purple, magenta, and blue. Truck traffic volumes are not as high on the local roadways. However, several of the local roadways within this study area do have very high truck percentages, some in excess of 10%. And truck traffic as a high percentage of overall roadway traffic can reduce capacity. Now to sum up. Starting with our approach, a consistent forecasting approach is being used with one travel demand model that has statewide coverage. This process is consistent with the department's approach for any regionally significant project. The statewide model has a validated base year of 2015 and a forecast year of 2050. And to the greatest extent possible, the model's major data inputs come from local adopted plans. Any data that is not directly from a local plan comes from standard sources that are used by local governments. In this presentation, we showed you 2018 peak season daily, peak hour, and truck traffic percentages. At next month's meeting, we'll show you how this information compares to the forecast for no-build traffic for 2050. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you for your attention. I'll take your questions.
Barbara, can you go back to the AADT slide, please?
You want the peak season? I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah, actually, that one and the other one, the colors are very similar, and I'm trying to figure out which color that is there coming through Marion County so that I'll have an idea of what those numbers are. And then
Okay.
also, the presentations are not on, I mean, I would have been able to see this had I been able to pull the presentations up.
If they're not up, they should be up momentarily. We were trying to get them up this morning.
Okay, all right.
And so through Marion County, that's the light blue color. That's the 5,000 to 20,000. That's the darkest
My
one.
question is the magenta, pink, whatever, which color is that that's going up 75?
Oh, I see. So that is the magenta.
Which
What is
one
it?
are you considering the magenta? What's that traffic count?
I just want the number. So
What's the actual number?
60 and 100.
Oh, 60 and 100,000.
Okay, and then can you go to the next slide and give me that number as well, please? Is it the 3 to 5?
This is the peak hour. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. My old eyes just can't discriminate between those two colors at this time.
All right,
Other
so
questions?
It would be helpful if I knew what the capacity of these roads are in their existing condition. And also for the road network, there are projects to add lanes and do improvements that are separate from the MCORES project. And it would be very helpful to know what, for instance, not just the daily traffic loads are, but what they can hold, where the triggers are for when you need to add a new lane, what the time frames are for next time when we have the 2050 projections or forecast. It would be helpful to know, where the triggers are when you need to add new lanes, or when you need, what's the experience on the ground in those communities when it hits certain thresholds, because it's somewhat helpful to know what the daily traffic loads are, but if I don't know what that means to local residents and capacity, don't know what to do with it.
Right. So one of the intent of this presentation was just to get comfortable with the process of how we develop traffic models. And certainly we're going to come prepared next time to talk about what traffic level service we have on each of the facilities, where it's A through F. We'll come and help you define that, or define that for you. It's a standard nomenclature we use. So we'll do that for you. And then we'll combine that with a 2050 no build option as well. Now her model, when she comes back with a 2050, will consider anything in the work program. So that'll take into account.
Right.
So
One more, Will. Bradley?
Thanks. I guess we do have, always have issues with models, just for the record. So the state has a statewide model, but we also look at the district level DOT model, and we actually have even more intense local models that really take in a higher level of calibration that the statewide model does not take into account. What we're seeing right now in regard to some of the feedback from DOT on developments is somewhat of a stop developing, because DOT doesn't quite know what to do with roads. And when we're talking about the work program, there's a problem associated with that when we have the work program actually had funding for widening of 470, funding for widening of 301 to start the design, but now the money's not there. So that throws in a lot of problems related to how to properly utilize a model when the appropriated funds, the program funds, start shifting around outside of the MPO process and the local government process. It puts us in a dilemma working with developers related to, are there truly impacts? And it does get to Jason's comment related to what are those capacities that DOT views for those particular roads, so that we can all sort of get on the same page. I do have a meeting coming up with District 5 related to this, where I've got District 5, we've got a PD&E for the interchange at I-75 and 514. This is something that's been in process since 2008. We had a future land use map for the Monarch Ranch, which is depicted within our future land use map, but not quite depicted on these other DOT maps. DOT made a statement that if those entitlements went forward, it backs up traffic on I-75. We need to change that, okay? Then what is the number we need to change it down to? Well, just submit something to us and we'll let you know if it was good or not. That's not the collaboration and partnership we expect with DOT. So I think that, again, from a model standpoint, just throwing out a statewide model doesn't cut it. You actually have to dial in to this specific corridor and then to the specific county MPO plans to be able to actually have something that's relevant for our discussion.
I think Barbara can help with that discussion because we do drill down and help calibrate it. So Barbara.
Yeah, and if I could follow up, thank you, Will. The purpose of this model and the reason why we're using this model is because we do have the ability to cut out a sub area for each one of the corridors, the MCORES corridors, and this gives us the ability to also approach each corridor using the same methodology and the same approach so that every project is being looked at consistently throughout the state. And to your point about the MPO models, in the areas that are covered by MPOs, we are using the model data that comes from the models that are used by the MPOs.
Correct. And the model that we actually used previously was a coordinated model with the district, MPO. We all use the same base traffic information to run through the process. I understand that it's being updated to the 2018 traffic, but honestly, the land use and development proposed didn't increase in intensity, but yet we're getting pushback on those. The concern for Sumter County is now we're adding this potential additional corridor, which now we're talking about increased potential traffic, potential development from it. Well, that exacerbates the existing issue that's not being addressed when funds that were allocated for improving those existing roads have been swept for other purposes.
So all we're going to do with the next step, though, is a no-build 2050 model. We'll still continue down the path once we further define corridors to do very specific modeling. So we're still kind of at a high level at this point in the process.
Pat?
Just real quick, just whenever y'all come back at the next meeting with more information, like I know we got this on the FTP committee about where people are going. I know y'all have that information as far as where they're going and where they're coming from. So that helps with traffic. I mean, if they're all going up 75 and going to Atlanta, then maybe the West Coast doesn't make any sense. So getting that information, then also, is there a way to get information of when it's at capacity on both sides, not just one side? Because I know a lot of it is one directional capacity or congested for like games. It's all southbound after the game and northbound to the game. And that's going to the Gator game. Nobody else goes any other, right? So, but just those numbers, if that's available, as far as finding out capacity on both sides.
Okay, thank you for that suggestion.
Good. All right, thanks, Barbara. All right, so the next presentation we're going to go through is just going to talk a little bit about funding and feasibility requirements for the department. So we're going to kind of go through some of the statutory requirements that did not change because of MCOR. So again, we're not skipping any steps as we move through the MCOR corridor development process. We're going to kind of go in a little more detail of two main components of project feasibility, both the environmental and the economic. And we're going to really focus on the economic feasibility portion of those two checks. Then we're going to describe kind of when that happens. I know everybody's eager to understand that. So according to the statutory requirements for MCORES, FDOT is responsible for allocating sufficient funds to implement the MCOR program.
and to develop a plan to expend the revenues from motor vehicle license taxes and to amend the current tentative work program for the 2019-2020 through 2023-24 fiscal years to include the work program projects. So the only thing that's meant to say is that now once MCOR has been implemented, we have to actually program any projects in the work program just like any other project. And then if we have to do it sooner, then we do budgetary amendments, which we have to do one for the initiation of MCORs.
Well,
Yes, sir.
question on that?
Sure.
As far as amending the current tentative work program, does that mean like our local projects will get cut at the expense of this, or what does that mean?
That's an excellent question. So hopefully y'all have heard me, and I'm going to make it again, is that MCORs will not displace other committed projects. So I think as an agency, we're comfortable saying that strongly. I mean, y'all have gone through the process of prioritizing those with MPOs and TPOs. So nothing that's been programmed will be displaced. So the language is strong in the statute that we will allocate sufficient funds. But as we work through the process, the next few slides, you'll understand that we still have to be responsible how we do that. All right, so the MCOR statute didn't allow us to override any feasibility. So again, we still have to meet both environmental and economic checks. And the pie chart just shows kind of an example of how MCORs could be funded. A lot of folks want to kind of go right toward the revenue source of the tolling to fund the project, but that's certainly one part of the funding scenario. And we'll go a little deeper in detail. So the MCOR bill kind of repeats a lot of the funding options that the department and the Turnpike has already, and we'll go through those. We can fund those through Turnpike revenue bonds, which I just mentioned, which is from the tolling facility itself, right-of-way and bridge construction bonds, financing by the FDOT Finance Corp, advances from the State Transportation Trust Fund, or funds created from private-public partnership, or any combination of. The bill also allows us to accept donations of land for right-of-way. And to the extent legally available, any toll revenues from the Turnpike system not required for payment of principal, interest, reserves, or other required deposits for bonds, cost of O&M, or other obligations can be used to repay advances of the Transportation Trust Fund. So there's really no new options. It just fully explains all the options that we do have. The only real new option is the next slide. So during session, we did reallocate some GR funds to the Transportation Trust Fund, and you can see the gradual increase. It also funds scrap and SCOP for county support and transportation disadvantage. You heard about the workforce development program this morning with Amy as well. But in the end, the MCOR funding will be about $100 million, or the pot of money that I'm talking about here is about $100 million extra a year to the work program.
I have a question on
Yes, sir.
scrap and stock. Now, will you be adding monies to the counties that already receive or get scrap and stock grants now? Will this funding be on top of that?
Yes, sir.
Or is scrap and stock just rolled into this?
No, these are on top. These are additional funding levels.
So this will be $10 million more on top of what we were already getting?
Yes, sir. That started current year. Any other questions on what MCOR funding provided with this past bill?
I've got a question. I know that you said that the project will not displace other projects that are in the work program, but I need some confirmation, but I understand that DOT's implemented a new rule, and again, may not be accurate, that if the right-of-way and construction dollars are not already programmed, that any funding that was allocated for PD&E projects or design would be removed from the program.
So there's two parts of the bill that's very clear. One, that we cannot fund construction until the task force is complete, and any portion that we do fund has to be at the 30% plans. So that tells you got to be pretty far along before we can even fund construction. I don't know if that answered your question.
Now, I was talking about other projects other than the MCORES projects, because was the explanation provided for the sweeping of the $20 million for fiscal year 21-22 for the widening of US 301 in Sumter County, as well as the same dollar amount being swept down to $5 million for the widening design for 470. Both of those projects have completed the PD&Es, and the money was programmed for the design to be able to then move into future right-of-way and construction.
And I apologize, I don't know the nuances of that particular project, but all I can do is confirm that we will not pull money from other projects to fund MCORES. All right, one of the questions that came up last time is what does it cost to build different types of corridors? So we've got two examples just to focus on today. One of them nearby the Suncoast Parkway 2. This one is under construction right now. 4-lane toll facility that extends from US 98 to State Road 44. It includes a new interchange at US 98 and West Cardinal Street, a partial interchange at State Road 44, 1 wildlife crossings and 3 wildlife culverts, 15 new bridges, 2 gantries, and all the other myriads of drainage, lighting, highway signing, signalization, and so forth. So cost, this does not include any of the design work, but this came in for a 13-mile section, $134 million, so roughly $10 million a mile for Suncoast 2. That was just construction cost. Okay, the other one that we referenced here is Wekiva. I think we've talked about some of the general numbers on that. This was a 25-mile tolled expressway. Total cost $1.6 billion. This included $500 million of non-toll road improvements, like State Road 46 widening and service roads, 10 miles of multi-use trails. Just the toll expressway itself was $44 million per mile, but that did include planning, PD&E, design, right-of-way, and construction. So what we try to do is give you construction cost only for a fairly simple approach, and then give you a total all-in cost maybe for Wekiva that gave a lot of considerations, many that we're talking about on the task force itself.
Did you say $44 million per mile for the toll road itself?
Yes, sir.
It actually came up to 64 a mile when it was calculated in the environmental cost on top of that.
Correct.
So the actual 1.6 billion divided 25 miles is 64 million a mile and change. So.
Right. What we try to carve out is just understanding what the toll facility costs versus the environmental enhancements cost.
And there were environmental enhancements associated with Suncoast 2 as well. There were several hundred acres of lands in the Withlacoochee State Forest that were utilized, and there had to be something like a 3-acre per 1 acre compensation where DOT had to go out and buy that. And I do not have the dollar figures on those costs, but they were in excess of that 10 million a mile.
Okay. Yeah, we can get those too. All right. Any other questions on what it costs? So again, we're not skipping any steps. We've still got to get past both these checks. Environmental feasibility is determined during the PD&E process, or project development environment study, to ensure the new roadway project can be constructed in a manner that minimizes impacts to the environment and focuses on natural, physical, and social environments. The economic feasibility is determined during the project's design phase. Again, we got to know what the project costs so we can come up with a plan. And it's a financial evaluation used for new projects. It can only occur when most of the major project elements have been determined or identified. This helps ensure development of an accurate project cost and a revenue forecast. I think I mentioned this earlier in the slide, but the economic feasibility evaluation also considers other funding sources besides or above and beyond the project's total revenue.
Now, Will, if I could comment at this point, there are really three pieces that I understand that exist in the economic feasibility arena, and they interrelate. The one that you're talking about at this point was the economic feasibility test in 3382218, which is that test that requires that in terms of bonded revenue that there be tolls generated projected on the 12th year of operation to pay at least 50% of the debt service, and then projected on to the 30th year of operation where they would pay at least 100% of the debt service. But in addition to that, I wanted to point out that there are some funding capability issues of a larger scale that have to be taken into account. And I've put together, using data from the latest audit of the Turnpike system, and Will, I know you have this paper, and you indicated to me yesterday you would, at my request, forward this to the other task force members after the meeting. But there are two other statutory thresholds that come into play that are sort of independent of the economic feasibility test in 338.221. And the first one is the statutory cap for the total Turnpike bond debt that exists in another part of the statutes, 338.2275, and that's a flat $10 billion statewide cap. And at this point, the existing Turnpike bond debt is already $2,580,365. If you would take the numbers that are associated with the Wekiva Parkway and add them to that, extrapolating the Wekiva Parkway cost across the 330 miles of all of the MCORES, that would come up to $21,120 million, which would exceed the statutory cap by some $13,700 million. Just for the sake of sort of discussing different costs per mile, if you were to say, for the sake of discussion, that the MCORES would only cost half per mile what the Wekiva Parkway cost, which would reduce it to $32 million a mile, you would still exceed the statutory cap for bonding by $3,140 million. And then the second issue that I think is perhaps the most significant question with regard to the limits on toll revenue being used for bonding is that if you look at the revenue from the last year, and if you can imagine all of the years leading up to 2019 are sort of an inclining plane, generally with a little more toll revenue coming in each year. It's a continually growing source, but if you just take the last year, the total toll revenues are $1,052 million, 1052. And once you subtract all of the mandatory deductions from that, which include the debt service on existing bonds, which for example is $258 million, and then you take out the operating costs that are another statutory deduction from the use of that toll funding, which is another 238 million, and then renewals and replacements and planning and development costs, you're left with $404,678,000 in revenue that might be used for additional debt service on more bonds. And the question becomes, okay, how far does that get you in terms of bond revenue that you might apply to MCORES? And using the existing ratios that the Turnpike bonds use, which is the debt service amounting to about 10% of the outstanding bonds annually. What that amounts to is that you could generate potentially, and I think this is probably larger than life figure, but potentially you could generate somewhere around $4 billion of new bonds with the toll revenues statewide being what they are. And if you look at assuming that it would cost half per mile what it costs to build into Wekiva Parkway, you would only be getting about 50% of what you need for the MCORES system out of toll revenues being bonded. So to me, the take-home message here is that the idea that you're going to build 330 miles of these turnpikes in a conventional greenfield construction manner is simply not within the finance picture that's capable under turnpike bonding. I think that the take-home message is that there's got to be some cost-saving efforts such as co-location brought into the picture in a very significant way in order to get this done. And I've got these. Anyone who wants these calculations, I've got them worked out, and I'll give you a sheet. I don't think I've got enough for everyone, but Will indicated he would distribute that to the email list.
Yeah, I'll get that to everybody. So Charles certainly is referencing some public documents we've got on the Turnpike website. You know, we fully disclose what the revenue is for the Turnpike, what our debt service is, what the differential is, which is what Charles mentioned, as well as some other financial forecasting tools out there. I think the big point here is the Turnpike's not unlimited, right? Does not have an unlimited funding source, so we've got to be smart with the decisions we make with this task force. And I think co-locating is a prominent discussion point we need to have, and that may be part of some of the guiding principles that come out of here. And I think the other part is, you know, there's some options on how we start and finish this project, even on the Turnpike corridor. So you guys have a lot of influence on how that looks, how it shapes out, and how we continue down the process of project development. Okay. All right, just again, I think y'all have seen this slide before. Our 5-step process for project development. Task force is kind of step one. It's a pre-planning component, and then we'll get into the alternate corridor evaluation as well as the PD&E and design. So one thing we are looking at is different ways to enhance different processes. So I believe the next one up is going to be talking about enhanced alternate corridor evaluation. But any other questions on financing or how we program?
Do we have any idea what the study cost? Sorry to cut you off.
Repeat that for me.
With the task force, these task force,
What
from
it
start to
costs?
finish for phase one. Do we have any idea what the cost is of that?
First year of MCORES was funded at $12.5 million. That included all 3 corridors, and that'll help support any owner's rep support you see here, as well as any preliminary planning or PD&E. So roughly about $4 million per corridor has been allocated for current year.
Yeah, you mentioned, Will, that one potential source of funding, or at least to reduce costs, would be donations of rights of way. And I know that you know, some landowners offer right of ways in advance of projects. I'm just wondering, within the study area, is there a record of any rights of ways that have been offered up by landowners for projects such as this? And if so, is there a way for us to find out where those are and what those look like?
So far, there's been no offers to us. I'm sure it's like anything, they don't know exactly where this thing may shape or form, so, but there's been no offers to the department at this point.
And I just wanted to make sure, Charles mentioned that the Suncoast Parkway Phase 2 cost you gave, you mentioned it was construction cost only,
Yes, sir.
not the environmental enhancements. Is that a number we could get?
Yes. And what we try to do is break it down just so you can see the differences, all-in costs versus pieces of cost, so you can really compare the two. But yeah, we can get you a full picture of that. Okay.
Jennifer, your praise?
Yep, Jennifer?
All right, Jennifer Stoltz again. We're going to have our discussion of the Alternative Corridor Evaluation, or ACE, process consistent with guiding principles. Okay. So the Alternative Corridor Evaluation is a little different from the enhanced ACE that's being used here. It's a two-step process. We're looking at a planning versus a programming. So there's high-level differences between the two in terms of the analyses performed. The ACE will be used to derive paths and courses that you heard us mention earlier that would identify potential locations for potential roadway, utility, water, wastewater, and broadband improvements. This planning process produces paths and courses that can minimize impacts, maximize enhancements, and recommend studied alternatives. So all 4 counties will be using this process. Okay, so we understand that some municipalities want to be avoided. We would initiate contact with the locals if they request paths or course development in their area. So in other words, some folks said they want it, some folks said they don't want it. We're still kind of working through all of that, but this is an iterative process, so we'll continue to refine these paths and courses at each of our meetings. So you know, some of the things that you'll see today, you've seen before. We'll continue to refine those at each meeting. So I'm sorry, I should explain the graphic. Sorry, I thought this was animated. Okay, so number 1 and 2 are the avoidance areas. So that's going to be one of the things we talk about later with the maps. Then we've got minimize areas. So that is where the choke point is in the red circle. We've got enhancement areas, which is the sort of the green off to the left, and then mitigation areas. So, and I think one of the things that we're seeing in this example are enhancements of existing corridors. So if you look at the map, sort of on the bottom and the side, that is one scenario that we can look at. Okay, so the refinement that would be based on guiding principles, and again, these are just kind of drawing examples. This is not our actual map. Basically, the past courses would be potentially removed from further consideration based on feedback during the ACE process. So path course number 2 might be removed due to non-conformance with guiding principles. And path course number 4 might be removed due to excessive or unreasonable impacts to an environmental constraint. So those areas that you see grayed out potentially would come out of consideration as we work through the iterations. Okay. And then the first step that we would want to do, and we will work through that today, is to define the avoidance areas. So in the map that's in your packet and at the back of the room, there will be will not impact areas, and then there will be no new corridor through areas. And these would be resulting from the guiding principles. And again, we'll continue to refine the guiding principles as we go. We had committed to avoid the first areas, which is the will not impact, and then to build no new corridors through the second areas, which will be the second. And we need your help as the task force to define any other areas that we need to avoid or not build new corridors through. Okay. So I think we're going to set up for that discussion, right?
But we got a question or two. Okay.
Hey, Jennifer, thank you very much. Kent Wimmer, Defenders of Wildlife. As the I-75 release study recommends enhancing US 41, what's the opportunity to consider an alternative routes paralleling I-75, such as US 41, which would necessitate expanding the study area? Can the task force recommend this alternative?
Yeah, I mean, the floor is open for whatever you guys want to recommend in the final report. We're open in carrying that forward.
I'll make the motion.
Charles, your tent card is still up. Is that from earlier? Hello? Oh, sorry.
Can you just clarify exactly what you're saying when it comes to 41?
I think the driving discussion in each of the first three task force meetings has been to focus on US 1998 corridor, and I'm suggesting that there are other corridors that actually would solve the problem that generated this bill, which is congestion on I-75. And I'm recommending that DOT look at alternatives that actually solve problems on I-95 or I-75 that they were pointing out today on the maps.
So Kent, my response will be similar to yesterday too. So eventually, certainly I-75 is being studied, planning process is completed, we're going through the PD&E, and likely we'll be adding capacity 75. At some point we'll reach capacity of 75, we will. So we're talking about avoidance areas today, but we are going to get into a discussion of which corridors do you want us to study as part of the PD&E. So that certainly would be a nice roll-in to that discussion, and we can talk about those corridors.
Looks like Bradley might be.
Yeah, just on that same topic, I don't know how productive that is. We've already gone through a task force related to I-75 and the capacity limitations of it. The last task force that some of us participated in wound up making a recommendation to improve the existing corridors, specifically US 301 was one of those, because that's currently the bypass when I-75 shut down through construction or accidents. So that may not be the desire of the legislative body at the state level, hence the reason for the creation of the law, as well as the task force that we're participating in.
Kathy, did you have more?
I did, and hearing you correctly, I would have to agree with Mr. Arnold from Sumter County. Based on the map that I'm looking at right here, that makes no sense. Sorry.
All right. Any other questions, comments?
It only makes sense depending on what problem you're trying to solve.
All right. So we are scheduled for a break. It appears that I'm assuming you two are, your tent cards remain up. Kent? All right. Keeping them. All right. So I think we have some time for a break, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, we'll stick with 15.
So
Let's see, 255, it's called 310.
And in your folders are these worksheets that we're going to refer back to that might be easy to look at the guiding principles as well as the Amy. So you might want to grab those for our conversation when we get back. Thank you.
Concrete floor. Sorry. I got a lot of comments. I have like, Peyton Manning, how he had the surgery, I mean, like that back surgery. And then my lower back, I have like no space between my foot and two. Wow. That was my family. But this one, I have like a big bone spur now. So it's like, every time I had like this.
All right, we're going to kick this back off. We've had lots of good information. Now we get to the meat of what we're looking to do with the Amy guiding principles. Keep those discussions going. So for the sake of the time, Will, back over to you.
All right, thank you, Terry. Let's all get back to your seats so we can get out of here at a decent time today. Thank you. All right, so we introduced kind of a new term, path and courses. And the intent here is, as we, the study area first started out with a very broad geographic area from county line to county line. And certainly any first step to project development includes what we're going to avoid. And we spent a lot of time in meeting number 2 talking about avoidance areas. But here we want to talk about what the department is committed to avoid. And those 2 topics Jennifer covered in the previous presentation. So the first one is what we're going to absolutely avoid. The department is committed to avoiding certain features along this corridor or along the study area. And avoid means avoid. So there is no if all extent possible, or if we minimize or mitigate, but we mean avoid. So we've got a list of what we're going to avoid. Yeah, and then this is kind of a rehash from Jennifer's. And then the other is what we agree not to build through. So we're not going to put a brand new corridor through. And so if you visualize a state park or a state forest that has state forest on either side of a road, 44, 19, whatever you want to picture, we agree not to put a brand new corridor through that. Now, what it does allow us to do is enhance whatever corridor is through that particular feature. But we would focus on enhancing that feature versus building a new one. And then the third bucket, so to speak, is what we need your help with as a task force, is what else do we need to add to it based on your recommendation. So we're going to give you kind of a baseline of what we agree to start with as an agency, and it's a good starting point, and then what we need your help to build on. So this is displayed in the back as well for kind of gathering around and talking, but this is the map that we are committing to as an agency right now. The pink is what we'll build no new corridors through, with a caveat of the Florida Greenway that we may have to bridge that somehow, somewhere, or enhance it. And
Where's
then,
the map?
sorry, I see it on my screen, not yours. Sorry about that. So here's the map. The light pink is what we agree not to build new corridors through, and the purple is what we agree to avoid completely. And the next slide will kind of go through the list form of this map. I think every member of the task force should have a copy of this map, and then we'll be posting this online as well for any of the public. If you need a printed copy from the public, we'll certainly get that to you too. All right, so here's the list. We've got, again, 3 buckets. What we will not impact, what we will absolute avoid, which is what that means. No new corridors through, layers. And then the list to the right is what we need your help with as a task force. So we can talk about it now, we can talk about it in any principles, but any comments on the maps, the list that we've displayed so far?
I have some additions, suggestions.
Jason's gonna get him. It's not Charles. Thank you.
You list Florida Forever owned lands, and it's not clear from those words whether that also includes Preservation 2000 lands and other state land acquisition derivatives for conservation, such as conservation and recreation lands. That was the program that came along before P2000. You've got several categories of state conservation land simply because they were acquired under different programs over a longer period of time. So Florida Forever is the most recent. Then you've got Preservation 2000. Then you've got conservation and recreation lands. I'm not sure whether those show up in the light pink color on your map, all of them or not. But they should be treated equally, we would suggest. And then there's another category relating to Florida Forever that we would recommend be included. And that is the active Florida Forever acquisition projects that are underway, where you have a willing seller, where you have mapped and prioritized land for acquisition, but they just haven't closed the deal yet. And for example, the governor and cabinet just bought about a 6,000 acre tract last week down in Sarasota County, but there are those tracts that are on that list scattered throughout Florida. So those should be in the mix. Then moving down to mitigation banks. That is a form of conservation easement, but there are other conservation easements beyond mitigation banks that are owned by, for example, Fish and Wildlife Commission, owned by DEP, owned by the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. Those are rural and family lands purchases. And again, I think those ought to be treated similarly in the same light pink category. And then the final matter that I will raise for consideration is that I think consideration should be given to placing priority 1 and priority 2 state wildlife corridor greenway designations in that category as well. I think those are the same suggestions that we made yesterday in the other task force meeting.
Okay, we'll get that added to the master list of comments, and we'll show you what she's captured in the next presentation piece where we're going to go into the any guiding principles. Any other comments, questions?
We'll start here. Zach.
All right, thanks. I'd like to add just a little bit, so the avoid, minimize, consider areas where there are prescribed fires or controlled burning smoke sheds. So Florida is an amazing state. If you're a private landowner, and the statutes and rule, it's your right to burn. There's a lot of landowners, specifically private, that a lot of their livelihood would depend upon conducting controlled burns within this region. And so what I propose is to share with the folks on this committee a map. I'm trying to gather together of all of the burn authorizations within this region. And we might find that there are some landowners that are really dependent upon conducting fire. And so that route is out, I guess. So it would be useful to actually pare that down, because one of the, to place a road near where some private landowner is dependent upon conducting a fire would potentially, endanger their own livelihood. So yeah, it would be great to add something like that, and I can get that data where it's actually each authorized fire.
Yeah.
Thank you, Will. I just want to get on record today, as we did yesterday. Some individual in here believe that a lot of this stuff ought to be taken out of play. But there's a lot of us that don't believe that. Okay, we believe that DOT does a great job. We believe our state legislators definitely understand our waterways and what to protect. So, with that being said, I just want it on record that just because some believe that a lot should be taken out of play, all of us don't believe that.
So Scott, good point. What you'll see in the next presentation is we've collected all those comments, and then we've got to narrow those down, right?
We're just gonna go around the table.
Mine is about the avoidance features and map. I think it's a little bit premature to hack off complete segments using this map. It gives a false sense of security for some folks. The will not impact items that you have the list that are reflected on the map. I don't know that there's a dispute on my side related to that. But as far as putting a blanket area for no new corridors through, I think that is very limiting. We had talked at a previous task force meeting related to the potential extension of the Turnpike in Sumter County. And without having economic development damage, really the appropriate corridor would be through a pink area, if you will, to be able to make that to the west of I-75 for this particular extension. So I'd be hesitant to support your avoidance feature and map as it's currently presented, just based on that particular issue.
All right, Commissioner?
I'm going to reserve my comments for after the rest of the presentation.
Okay.
All right.
I would have to agree with this commissioner's comment that he just made. This map definitely gives I feel a false sense of hope because we don't have a line on the map yet. But you have in Levy County, you have Goethe Forest, and you have Devil's Hammock, blotted out here in pink for no new corridors through. So does that allude to 19? That would be pretty much it.
So we try to describe it. So obviously the first list is, hey, we agree not to impact it at all. The second list is we agree not to build a new corridor through, but if we have an existing corridor that is adjacent to or already through, then we can enhance or improve that corridor. So 19 is a good example, next to Goethe State Park. We agree we will not put a new roadway right through the middle of Goethe, but we also reserve options to improve 19.
You ready now?
Well, I just need clarification on one of your statements. The Greenway is on this no new corridors through. And so you said you were committed to that with the exception of the Greenway. So can you give us an idea of where you possibly could see building a new corridor through the Greenway?
Well, I think our intent was to maximize the preservation of state parks, right? But Florida Greenway, I'll go back to the map, kind of cuts the study area in half. So we made a small exception to the Greenway, not that we want to impact it, but we may have to bridge it or enhance it to mitigate anything that we do. Because it does create a boundary effect for the study area.
All right.
Yes, a couple comments on clarifying the draft of the guiding principles on natural areas. You combine avoid and minimize and have separate categories for mitigate and enhance. I would suggest exclusive categories are avoid, not going to touch. And the other extreme is enhance, in that minimize and mitigate are the two that ought to be combined.
Okay, well, we'll move into the collected Amy principles so far, and Jennifer will come up here and
We have one more
Wait,
part up.
I'm not finished. Well, Mr. Chairman. And then under conservation areas on the guiding principles, under item 2, avoid, minimize, mitigate, should list
item that's listed down below under the bullets as meeting item E, and the term of art is natural resources of regional significance as identified in strategic regional policy plans. So we added an item E as natural resources of regional significance as identified in strategic regional policy plans of the regional planning councils that cover these counties, where the local governments have come together collectively and identified what are the most significant natural resources in that particular region. And then down on the list under avoid minimize, everything said, all the bullets say consider. I'm not really sure what consider means under avoid. Avoid is we're not going to touch it. I don't know how we're just going to consider it. But the exception is, it says avoid the regional significant resources of strategic regional policy plans. And I can share with you, at least in North Central Florida Regional Strategic Policy Plan, natural resource regional significance are not avoid areas. There are areas, if activity does occur, that you need to minimize and mitigate. That's when you moved over to minimize, mitigate column. And you probably need to consider a different word other than consider under the avoid column as well. Thank you.
Kurt, are your comments related to the map and conversation we were at?
To the map, yes.
Okay.
So, you know, looking back at the slide that Ms. Tootle presented with us, the projected population increase was somewhere around 12 million in 2070. I mean, that's a lot of new mouths to feed. And, you know, I appreciate Mr. Carnahan's comments about producers selling out and moving to Georgia. But I'm not worried about those producers. I'm worried about the 300 plus commodities that are here in this state. And to have a strong and vibrant agriculture within this state. And, you know, I know this road's got to go somewhere. But we need to keep in mind of those 12 million new mouths that we've got to feed. And in the planning process, I think we can achieve what we're all trying to see. And, you know, there was a comment about keep rural, rural and keep urban, urban. Yeah, I love that comment because I think if we plan this thing correctly, we can maintain an adequate acreage of agricultural land out there to feed those people and have a safe and abundant supply of food and fiber for Floridians. And, you know, in saying that, I think yesterday at the task force meeting, some of the small towns in there that, you know, that were not wealthy at all, you know, they can't afford to pay more than what they have to, than what we can provide a very cheap source of food. And the cheapest way to do that is produce it locally. So I think in our planning process, we certainly need to consider some of those agricultural lands that are within this study area that are not just ag lands, but they're prime agricultural lands. They're very efficient lands and can produce an abundant crop. So I think we need to consider some of those as possibly putting them on this map. You know, I appreciate Ms. Bryant's comment about the farmland preservation area. You know, those need to be in this map as well, and we need to be able to see those areas so that there are no new roads going through them. But also some of the prime, some of the best ag lands out there, we don't need to put a road through them, no new road, because once that's taken out of production, it's gone forever, and we've lost that. And some of the beauty, some of the agriculture that we see driving down the roads today, that's what brings all those folks to Florida. It's not just beaches. You know, it's the beauty and it's the wide open areas that folks love. That's why they come here. So I just think we need to consider some of those, taking some of those prime lands, some of the best lands off the map, so that we're not plowing through without a good plan. Thank you.
And that's one more comment to make. You know, I think the one thing that this task force needs to keep in mind is that we are talking about 3 different projects when we talk about this CORES project. You've got the Suncoast Parkway, or the Suncoast Corridor, the Southwest Central Florida Corridor, and the Northern Turnpike Corridor. We can vote no build when it comes to the Northern Turnpike Corridor, and they still have it. And I appreciate that, but in order for us to keep this meeting the way that it should be run, if you can hold your applause, I would greatly appreciate it. This task force is only charged with the connector part of it. And if you look at Marion County, if you look down in Sumter County, there's already two very viable connectors right there. You have 44 and you have Highway 27. Those, and I drove Highway 27 coming over here this morning. There's plenty of capacity on Highway 27. So I think that while we're going through this exercise, that this task force needs to not, we don't have to solve that. I'm not quite sure that there is as big of a problem for the connectivity to the Suncoast as is being made out to be. And we can solve those issues without disturbing vital areas that make Florida what Florida is and that draw people to Florida.
Thank you. Kent, you had your 10 card up.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Kent Wimmer, Defenders Wildlife. I have the pleasure of serving on two task forces. This one and tonight, mic not working. My fingers aren't, lights on. Kent Wimmer, Defenders of Wildlife. I am pushing it. I'm pushing it hard. Anyway, serving on two task forces, we ended up having different guiding principles. I think I'm recommending to DOT that develop at least consistent principles as you evaluate these three corridors, because we can't have, to me, in my mind, DOT operating on three different sets of guidebooks or principles for how they're going to develop these corridors. I mean, if you're going to plow over certain areas in some places, if you're going to protect certain areas somewhere, you got to protect them everywhere.
So Kent, that is a balancing act, right? We want to make sure we customize any guiding principles that comes out of this task force that you have consensus on, and what we can do to help rectify that as we move through this process. You'll get to see the other two corridors. I know you have the liberty of seeing both of them now, or two of the three, but we'll share what the other corridors are doing, and you may see a best practice you want to pull from them, or vice versa. All right, so we're going to go through the next part of the presentation, which is the collection of all your comments and our first attempt draft format of some guiding principles. I think we've already heard some comments. Maybe we got to wordsmith it. We got to go a little further, a little harder. So Jennifer's going to give you where we are, and then we'll get into another discussion.
Okay. Thank you, Jennifer Stoltz again. So we will, if you want to refer in your packet, I know some of this will be a little hard to read on the screen. There are 3 11 by 17 pages folded up in your packets that have the worksheet details for the draft avoidance, minimization, mitigation, and enhancement, or AMI, guiding principles that were based on the task force comments and discussions from the October and December meetings. There is also a draft of the summary of those guiding principles, which is a one-page item. And so basically the items from the one-page summary are what appear in the green shading at the top of the worksheet. And so what we attempted to do here was capture the comments from those two task force meetings in the worksheet and summarize them. Sometimes we've had lengthy discussions on some of these items, and we can't necessarily put a 2-page verbatim guiding principle. So we did try to summarize, paraphrase, etc., and hopefully capture the essence of it. We did try to group the comments into certain items, and so if with your indulgence, we will kind of walk through those today, and then we'll continue to refine these in this meeting. So okay. All right, so let me go, we'll flip to the handouts. So if you're looking in the worksheet, so there were several natural environment items, and so we grouped those. So there's a conservation area item to enhance by applying innovative planning and design strategies aimed at protecting, restoring, and conserving habitats and natural ecosystems, and then avoid, minimize, or mitigate, if required, impacts to conservation areas, including public conservation lands, Florida Preservation 2000 Act lands, Florida Forever Program required lands and projects, Lands identified as priority 1 and 2 in Florida Ecological Greenways Network, managed lands and mitigation banks and easements. Okay. Sorry, these sheets are too big. Okay, so then if you go to the second page in the natural section, there's a wildlife and habitat grouping, which is to avoid, minimize, or mitigate, if required, impacts to endangered or threatened species and their habitats or wildlife corridors. The third natural category is water resources. Avoid, minimize, or mitigate. I'm sorry, I'm not picking up the slides in here. All right, here we are. Okay, avoid, minimize, or mitigate, if required, impacts to important water resources, including spring protection zones, spring sheds, outstanding Florida waters, groundwater recharge areas, wetlands, floodplains, and other surface waters. Enhance springs priority focus areas and impaired water bodies by capitalizing on opportunities to convert septic to sewer systems and watershed-wide water quality improvements. And avoid or minimize impacts to sinkhole and karst areas. Okay, so then we move into the cultural. And we've got avoid or minimize impacts to existing neighborhoods and residential communities by maintaining the surrounding character while accommodating potential growth and development. And avoid or minimize impacts to cultural resources, including historical and archaeological resources, as well as lands owned by Native American tribal nations. Okay, then moving into the social elements, enhance mobility and accessibility in areas with a high concentration of transportation disadvantaged populations. Enhance economic development opportunities by locating interchanges in a manner that considers local land use vision and goals. Avoid, minimize, or mitigate, if required, impacts to farmland preservation areas, Florida Rural and Family Lands Protection Program lands, agricultural lands, and timberlands. Consider transportation of agricultural products to distribution centers and markets, and minimize impacts to productive agricultural lands. Enhance access to emergency shelters and other emergency facilities. Oops, sorry. Okay, and then the last element is the physical. Minimize impacts to environmentally sensitive areas by locating the corridor such that it follows existing transportation rights-of-way and utility corridors or easements where feasible. And enhance local and regional transportation network connectivity. So Christine, I think we're working through a few technical issues here, but if you could help us facilitate our Amy discussion,
Sure.
We can continue to refine these guiding principles.
Absolutely. So it'd probably be helpful, and you've got the list in front of you, to help guide the conversation in a constructive way by saying, hey, I'm looking at the cultural, and this is what I think you need to edit, whether it's add, eliminate, reduce, whatever it is. Let's have some productive conversation with that. All right? Are we all good? Looks like I've seen your picture. Oh, there's one. Okay.
Hi. So I'm looking at physical, the last category, and you have here basically a huge loophole because it says when it is impossible to avoid sensitive environmental areas, consider avoidance using bridges and co-location with existing infrastructure. This creates a loophole that basically swallows up everything else that preceded it. So I think we really need to be extremely careful in delineating what exactly is impossible. If no build is possible, then that needs to be factored in. And then I would also just concur with Mr. Coons in terms of the verbiage used under. I agree that you should have under all of these categories where it says avoid, minimize. Those conflict. Minimize should be cobbled together with mitigate. Minimize and mitigate. Avoid needs to be its own separate, rather sacred category, quite frankly. And when you use verbiage under avoid that includes words like consider, much like Mr. Kuhn said, that kind of waters it down. This should be a very elite category. And that's what I would suggest is removing the language of consider under the avoid category.
All right. Charles, I see your card up.
Shame these things won't stay on. Okay. One, I want to echo the recommendation of Commissioner Bryant, going back to the maps, that the farmland preservation area that is specifically designated in the Marion County Comprehensive Plan be added to the late pink areas on the map. The second point I'd like to make is I realize these statements of principle have different evolutions in different task forces, but I would suggest that you do a comparison between those that were developed and that we dealt with yesterday in the Suncoast Corridor Task Force and the ones we're dealing with here. For example, there are several that were identified in yesterday's meeting on the papers that you handed out, which are not shown here, that I think would be relevant, particularly number 4 on yesterday's handout, which reads, develop a land protection program as part of the project to coordinate and implement, I'll have to pull this apart. Coordinate and implement the acquisition of identified conservation lands. That goes to the specific part of Senate Bill 7068 that talked about acquisition of related lands as a part of the project. And that was in the principles we dealt with yesterday. I think it should be in the principles we deal with here with regard to the Turnpike.
We're going to continue to visit these. This isn't the final. Jason?
Yeah, I'd just like to make a note about the enhancement area. At the next meeting, when we get the 2050 traffic projections, I anticipate that we're going to be shocked at some of the projections for some of the existing roadways. And when it comes to wildlife crossings and corridors and connections, right now, some of the low traffic roadways still have some permeability for deer, bobcats, black bear. But as traffic levels increase, those become less permeable and you're going to have more wildlife impacts. So there's an area of enhancement that I would like to see considered by FDOT in general, in particular to this process, where when traffic levels reach a certain threshold, that becomes an alternative or an option for enhancement activity, such as putting in culverts or land bridges that can reconnect and replace the lost function that results just from increased trips on the same road.
Anyone else? Have we worn you out today? Yes. Charles, do you have another point or is that still the same? Okay. Will you speak to the requests that Charles made about the Amy principles transitioning between corridors? I mean, because we do have to be mindful of the sunshine law and that there are 3 separate. So how do we want to handle that request?
As far as the interim work product? Which
That we're sharing some of the principles, it sounds like. Good ideas from one.
There's no, that was in the initial advice we got about the sunshine laws. We can even talk to another task force member on a different task force. We just can't talk to the ones on this task force. So there's no sunshine law issue there.
We haven't. Sorry, I probably. Do you want to come up to the microphone, Diane?
Thank you. I wanted to remind the board that even text or communication of information between board members not in this form would be a violation of the Sunshine Law. I heard one mention earlier about some data being sent out. You can send the data to board staff, and they can bring it to the next meeting, and then it can be dispersed in the public. What were you talking about just now with the Sunshine?
Well, I had a question, I guess a clarification, to keep these three separate, right? It was determined that they're separate task forces.
Yes.
And if we're borrowing information that has been discussed at another task force meeting, can that easily transition task force to task force?
Any member of the task force can talk to any other person except people on this task force. So that's fine.
Okay, so we can just share information.
Yeah, and we can do that. We can bring their drafts over and y'all can review those. We're happy to share between the task force. I mean, we're trying to get to some best practices moving forward anyway.
Yeah, I just had one suggested addition from the other guiding principle in the other task force, and that was the one that's number 4 from yesterday. Develop a land protection program as part of the project to coordinate and implement acquisition of identified conservation lands. And I just suggest we pick that one up and add it here.
Yeah, I got that on there now.
Okay. So this is the refinement of the guiding principles, so we're good? Yeah.
Do we need to, as Mr. Coons was saying, do we need to split up those and find out which one is an avoid and which one is a minimize in that category? Because there's some that are intermixed there. Now would be the time versus waiting for next year.
Sure. I think we, we've taken down all the comments here today, and what we'll do is we'll go back for the next meeting and try to be responsive to today's comments at the next meeting. I don't know that we're capable of doing that all sort of live, but certainly we'll take a look at that and see if we can refine that.
Yeah, I just didn't know if we needed to, as a committee, say which one is avoid and which one is minimize in that category that you have up there on all those.
If there's anything you feel strongly about, tell me. We'll take it down and we'll work on that.
Or we can bring it back to you as a suggestion for your review. Yes, sir. Yeah?
So just for clarification, I like the idea of several task force members saying separate void. And for clarification, do we need to get a consensus of this body, whether we all agree that a void should be separate and clarify that a void means just that, a void exclusively?
Well, I think at this point, we probably just need to keep working and just like we're doing, bring it back.
Yeah, I'll support that consensus position. I think it'd be very helpful for us to review if the category is clearly avoid, where it's combined, minimize, mitigate, and a separate category for enhance. Most certainly helps us to be able to meet the time frame for October for something that's meaningful.
Well,
And I agree.
And I would suggest that you probably have 3 legitimate categories. One's the absolute avoidance, and then the other one would be absolute avoidance of some new green field, with the exception of the use of an existing right-of-way that's already there, expanding on that existing right-of-way. I think that's a possibility that ought to be preserved within those light-colored pink areas.
All right, so you see folks standing before you, but we also have a lot of folks around the room that are taking notes and pulling together information. Some folks that are also working on other task forces. So we will pull all this information together from today and come back to you with what we heard and get some reactions then. How's that sound? Okay. Kathy, are you good with that?
I just want to know, the map is going to be revised and the farmland preservation area is going to be added to that?
I think DOT is taking,
We'll add it to the overall list of comments, and then as y'all debate that, that'll move it further along.
That's not what I asked.
Well,
So
just like,
Marion County has in their comprehensive plan, we have identified this area as an area that we really don't want to see turn from a rural area. And I'm asking for that to be put on this map as one of those areas, at least as your pink area.
okay.
Along with that,
Just for clarification, was that okay that it will be done?
I think all the comments today are items that we'll take back and take a look at.
That's not what we're asking, though. I appreciate you, but we're asking, will you put it on the map? Is the okay, yes, it will be, or no, it will not be? Or maybe it will be?
The map that you saw is a commitment from the agency on the first steps of what we agree to avoid, what we agree not to build a new corridor through. That third bucket is what you guys are providing. So if the final consensus of the group is to add that to it, it will be part of that list.
okay, and I respect that, but I will remind you of what happened in Marion County the last time that you talked about bringing the Suncoast connector through there. And I'd like for you, while you're considering that between now and the next meeting, to think about what happened within that farmland preservation area.
I do. So in relation to what's going on at the request of Commissioner Bryant and Ms. Hanchar, should that also be identified in our other counties that we're considering if the counties have established farmland
it's my understanding that is the only county.
They should be identified in those other counties as well?
That is the only farmland preservation area, correct?
That's the only one I'm aware of.
Thank you.
I think the question that you just raised is a good one. In fact, Marion County is the only county that has expressly identified by meets and bounds a farmland preservation area in their comprehensive plan. However, within other counties, there are databases that establish the existence and the boundaries, if you will, of prime agricultural lands. And so another feature, I think, should be worked in to the mix of guiding principles would be at least a softer avoidance of those, even if they're not designated in the comprehensive plan. Prime agricultural lands are scarce commodities, and particularly when they deal with ranch lands, they also are areas that harbor immense wildlife value. And so if there are prime agricultural lands that are identified, for example, through the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, then I think those ought to be accounted for in the guiding principles in terms of areas that should be avoided, and if not avoided, they should be mitigated and otherwise not just run over by a road.
Commissioner?
I certainly appreciate Commissioner Bryant's comments about the farmland preservation area and respect that. As a local elected official, she's very close to her constituents. I would be concerned about the task force placing other properties on an avoid list, because they're, unless your local elected officials come to the task force or sitting on this task force say, stay away from this area. This is an avoidance area. Because there may very well be some owners of prime agricultural land that are ready to sell. And we're taking that opportunity away from them by moving it to an avoid situation. If they want to be there, that's great. Then I think absolutely we avoid that as what Marion County has outlined. But I think just to start painting broad swaths of pink, saying, well, we want these people we want these properties out of the picture, we want these properties out of the picture, it may be taking away some opportunity from landowners who might be looking at an opportunity.
Bradley, you had a question, or Steve?
So I think if the local government has gone to that point, as Marion County has, to have that specific designation, to me, I think that speaks very powerfully from the local government on this task force. And to avoid continued confusion on this particular topic, I'm offering to the chairman that call for consensus. I support Commissioner Bryant's position that it in fact be placed on the map as requested as an area where a corridor should not go through, because their comprehensive plan, which went through public involvement process, is very clear, very strong, very powerful for their particular county. We don't have that in Sumter County, and for a reason. We're still a developing county. If we think that it's something that's important, we'll go through that local process, and the board can take into public comment and make a determination for a particular overlay if they choose to do so. We've not done so at this time, but I think we should respect this through consensus for support of Commissioner Bryant's request.
Well, I think at this point, we'll still take it back, because I'm sitting here now, don't really know what, we will certainly respect that, like Will has said, we're gonna respect what the locals want. But at this point in the game, at this stage of the game, there's obviously other things there. So I would ask that the staff side to take that back, figure out what it really means, and if it's easy a pink area, it'll be a pink area. But we need to take a look at it without just making a spur of the moment yay or nay.
All right, we have a couple more tent cards up, and then we'll move into kind of next steps from today. And then we do want to honor our 4 o'clock public input opportunity. So I see a couple of tent cards. Jane, was that you?
Yes. Thank you. And just a corollary to, is it Commissioner Kennard's comment about, there might be property owners that really want to sell and make this road happen. The corollary to that is, if this is a designation in an area where they don't want it, have we considered the potential takings claims and Burt Harris taking claims, and what the financial impact of that is going to be, not only locally but potentially to the state? How is that going to be factored in if it runs through an area that they don't want it?
I think what we're trying to do is really stay way up on, looking at paths and courses right now, and not get too far into the exact details of let's work through the process as we've defined it, if you don't mind. And then we'll see, we're mindful, yes? Okay. May.
Commissioner Kennard, I just want to let you know, as the city of Denellen and with Marion County, of course, that was a very large project that we all agreed on, we all voted on, as far as our individual cities and such. So when Commissioner Bryant said that she was speaking for all of Marion County, so I just want to clarify that for you. So, okay.
Yeah. All right, Danny, we haven't heard from you today.
I just to make sure everybody's on the same page with that, whether I'm in support of what Commissioner Bryant said. I just don't know exactly what that area looks like. So just from a visual perspective, as you come back, just if we can have like a hash mark or something like that, just so we have a visual representation of that, that would be helpful for at least myself, if not others.
I think it's actually in your folder in the land use. You get an idea for that.
Okay, my apologies.
That's okay. Well, Commissioner, since you're our host today, you get the last word on this roundtable conversation.
If we're adding pink to the map, just make all of Levy County be pink.
All right, noted. All right, so we're going to go through a couple minutes of next steps of what we heard from you all today, so that we're ready for meeting number 5. All right.
Yeah, get the screen, please.
Analyze and summarize public comments. We heard that very early on when Jennifer was doing the overview of the public input that we've received. You all want us to dive a little deeper and give you some feedback as to what we're hearing, not just quantify the number of comments, right? Loop in agencies that deal with disabilities. We heard that, and I thought, we try to be mindful and thoughtful and inclusive, right? But it's important to be mindful of this as well. So dealing with disabilities for workforce development opportunities, I thought was a great suggestion. The department's committed to support DEO and the regional planning councils to provide assistance to local governments. We know that there are some smaller communities that this is real to them as well, and we want to be good partners in that as they need to revise their comp plans. Present capacities and level of service, so that's volume over capacity, right? For existing roads and origin destination data, where trips begin, where they end. Provide environmental mitigation costs for Suncoast 2 Phase 1 and Wekiva, because some of those costs were not clearly called out, and that's important in some of the conversations that we've had. Continue to collect task force comments and refine draft guiding principles. So we heard you, and let's see what this looks like when we come back next month. Oh, more. Okay, meeting materials posted online today. Meeting summary will be distributed within the next 2 weeks. Once again, you have a whole team here that are taking notes as we go along. You do have the meeting evaluation forms in your folder. Please take some time, fill that out. Let us know what you think, what we could do better. I think you also see that we're regularly evolving our work plan to be reflective of the input that we're receiving from you along the way. Task force meeting number 5 is March 25th in Ocala, and the community open house is March 26th at the College of Central Florida in Chiefland. So, big day. We covered a lot of stuff. Can you think that panel was just this morning? It just seems like a long day. And then the next thing we have before us is the public input. And as we've mentioned, it is important every step of the way. This is not the only avenue and venue for you to provide that input. You can leave a note. We do have public comment forms people have filled out. I think right now we have 16 and counting. Thank you, Derek. We have 19 of them. So we limit public comments to 3 minutes, sorry. And there'll be a countdown clock that you'll be able to see right here on the screen when you look down. The audio is right here, the microphone. I will call 3 names at a time so you kind of know where you are in the queue for that public comment. And then we will sit here, and we really appreciate members of the task force. Folks have been sitting here all day waiting to provide that input, so we appreciate your attendance as we work through that as well. Our friends in the audience, as you come down, please, I know you're in bleachers, please use the hand railing when you come down just to make sure that you're safe along the way. So I'm going to be calling the names from here, and I'll do 3 at a time. If you can come around to this point, we do have a lot of cords and everything here. We don't want you to trip. So, are we good? All right. So I'm going to start the first 3. And when you,
Christine?
Yes.
I had my card up here.
Yes, ma'am.
So before you go into public comment,
Yes,
I just want to say to Will and Jennifer, if I'm a little passionate, it's because I had to go down this road with my constituency, and it wasn't fun then, and I can only imagine what it would be like in round 2.
Noted? Noted. All right. So we have three, and when I announce your name, when you come up to speak for your 3 minutes, please let us know the county of your residence.
Jason, just leave,
That helps our
Adam,
task
just leave it
force
on the
members as
microphone.
well.
Jason's gonna take
Really
you.
recognize,
Just have somebody
who
comes
their
up.
constituents are as well to help them be identified. So with that, we have the first three are Shirley Denton, Barb Toyke, Toyke, and Lindsay's 4, Mabel
Yes, sir.
Patterson.
Yep.
So when you come up, if you can identify who you are and the county of residence. Shirley, you're first. And please, everything's taped down there. Please we've taped it. Just be mindful there. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Shirley Denton. I live in Hillsborough County, but I'm speaking on behalf of the Florida Native Plant Society, which is a statewide conservation organization. I wanted to, first of all, we are going to be submitting written comments, so I'm just going to be summarizing these. But basically, we wanted to emphasize that even if you stay out of conservation land, what you do adjacent to conservation land may ultimately affect the quality of the conservation land and our ability to manage it. In particular, our concern is fire. Most of the native plant communities in the area that you guys are addressing are what we call pyrophytic or fire dependent. And in order to have those plant communities continue to provide the services that they provide, both for plants and for wildlife, which happen to depend on their habitat structure and food sources, we need to be able to manage the plant communities. Fire is commonly used because it's cost effective. There are no cheap substitutes for fire. In the area, your study area, in the past 10 years, 6,147 permits were issued to both land managers, private and public. These covered burns on over 1 million acres of land. Interestingly enough, 72% of these permits were issued to the private sector. These are the people who manage the timberlands and who also manage other types of agricultural lands. Yesterday, we saw both kinds of burns in progress. What we need to do is to buffer any areas that need to be burned by enough distance to prevent highways from stopping the burns, or from the burns accidentally resulting in smoke due to changing wind conditions and causing fatalities on highways. So we will be submitting a report. We will be telling you where these burns have been and giving you some real information.
Thank you so much. All right, we have Barb Toyke next, and then Mabel, and then Lindsay Cross.
Hi, my name is Barb Tepke, and I live in Tampa, Florida. Not here, but my tax dollars will be used to pay for these roads. Please avoid building this road. Why spend millions of dollars on a new road that's not necessary? Why not use that money to repair existing roads and bridges? Minimize. Please do not minimize the destruction of wetlands and wildlife habitat to build a new road that nobody needs and that wasn't in FDOT's long-range plans. And do not minimize the waste of taxpayer dollars to build this road. Mitigate. Why destroy historic, hydrologically significant wetlands and then try to create new ones? The 2007 Heartland Parkway study said that the state can avoid, minimize, or mitigate, but they had never done it on such a vast scale. And that was just the 1/3 of what they're attempting to do now. Enhance. One way to enhance Florida's environment is to buy more sensitive land, as directed by the Florida Forever Amendment. The state can buy land and make arrangements with neighboring ranchers and farmers. The state does not need to build a toll road to develop wildlife corridors. Please recommend no build.
Thank you. Next is Mabel Patterson, please, your county. And then Sally Ann Collins, you would be the third one up here.
Hello, I'm Mabel Patterson. I live in Hillsborough County, and I have, speaking for no one but myself and all of the people that I have talked to since I first heard about this road project, and my antenna went up and said, this is a boondoggle, and this is not right. I've looked at your goals. I've been to 4 meetings now, the initial meeting in Tampa and one for each of the corridor task forces. And the goals are very worthy, but none of these goals require a toll road to carry out. There are better ways that we can spend our money. If we want to alleviate congestion, then we should be working on those areas where there really is a lot of congestion. And we should be looking at transportation methods that will solve that. If we want to connect rural communities, we shouldn't build a toll road that goes around them and takes business away from those communities. If we want to create jobs, then we should build better schools. And we should train our workforce so that they can have those better jobs. A toll road doesn't guarantee any of these things. I hope I've been impressed by listening to the task force members, by the commitment they have to protecting Florida, and I just encourage you to keep doing that, not to let compromise change your mind about how things should be done here in Florida. This is not the way they should be done. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to make an adjustment here so that
Good stuff.
If you can't duck it, right? All right, I'm Lindsay Cross. I represent Florida Conservation Voters. We're a member of the No Roads to Ruin Coalition, and I reside in Pinellas County. First of all, task force members, I want to thank you all for being here. I know that you're doing this all on your own or your agency's dime, not getting paid millions from our general revenue funds to do this. So I appreciate you being here. Having attended most of these meetings, I also know that you're working really hard to provide your comments and concerns to DOT. I know that DOT, you also have a lot on your plate dealing with this legislation that came to you last year. It is concerning to see, though, that halfway through the process, we still have a lot of unanswered questions. I recall at December's meeting that we would have some draft alignments by now, and Mr. Watts indicated that we still may not have those by October, which I think makes it really difficult for you in your local government planning capacities to do what is right for your residents. Some of the input you've provided, particularly in terms of the areas that you want to protect, the Marianne Farmland Preservation Area, have not been reflected. I want to encourage you to stay strong and make sure that you're doing your due diligence in your own local areas to map out the places that are really important to you, whether that's for their ecological value or their cultural significance, and be ready to continue to share those and not rely just on this process to protect those things.
Some of the comments during the economic development panel, I think, were a little discouraging to me, in particular about the value of agriculture. Those of us who fight for agricultural preservation every day know how important our ag lands are. And the comments that economic development really doesn't come to these communities until we transition our ranches into rooftops is the wrong message. And unfortunately, I think it's one that is shared by people in the community, especially some of those migrants that are moving to Florida. So remember that the last crop is houses. Finally, I just want to remind you all that this isn't a farewell tour. The economics on this road have not been proven. We see that it could be anywhere from $10 to $64 million a mile, but that doesn't take into account broadband or sewer. There's a lot of money that is going to have to go into these roads, and we don't have the numbers to show that it's going to be better than what we're giving up right now. So if you bought tickets to see the Rolling Stones on their last farewell tour, you probably know that they're coming back for another tour. So if you say no build to this road, it doesn't mean that your community is doomed to have no economic development or no new roads forever. It just means that this may not be right for your community at this time. So I would encourage you to exercise that option of no build. Thank you.
Sally Ann Collins, and then after that is Robbie Blake and Herman Younger.
Hopefully you can hear me. I'm Sally Ann Collins, and I happen to be one of those people that actually lives here in Levy County by choice. I love Levy County. I came here specifically because it was a rural county. I came from South Florida. I have been here 30 years. I hope to be here at least another 10, if for no other reason than to say, do not ruin our county by bringing excess roads through here. There would be a lot more people that might be aware of what's going on in these meetings if you had continued to have this broadcast on the Florida channel. It was not on the Florida channel yesterday. It's not on there today. Most of the people that I know would not be able to stream off their computer because we have a lack of sufficient broadband in this county at this point. I do not see that that's going to be the answer. Bringing a highway through here, through our towns, through our rural country, I also am a master gardener. I belong to all these groups. Alachua County does not want this road. Marion County, I fought on those task forces too as a volunteer. We don't need it here. We may need jobs, we may need roads repaired, but we don't need to spend that money on a road through Chiefland.
Thank you. We have Robbie Blake, Herman Younger, and then Renee Cannon.
My name is Robbie Blake. I'm a 40-year resident of Levy County. I own land on Chunky Pond, and I want to first of all thank you for listening to the people of Levy County, many of whose lives will be irreparably altered by the decisions that you make. I'm very happy to see that the recommendations about preserving Goethe State Forest, Chunky Pond, and other important lands and waters along Highway 337 have been taken into consideration. Any changes to the wetland areas has a profound impact on our springs and our groundwater levels, not to mention the bald eagles, bobcats, deer, panther, otters, cranes, and other important species under threat of extinction. I want to talk about Highway 1998, which on this map of Levy County, you can all see. 1998 goes like a cross. It goes straight across all the way through the county. It's a divided 4-lane highway.
that runs the whole length of the west coast of Florida. No one uses it very much, and it's only 9 miles from that road to Bronson. It makes no sense to build a new road when you have 1998 already available. With sea level rise already affecting South Florida from Miami to Fort Lauderdale and northern portions of the coastal communities, billions of dollars will be needed to make infrastructure changes because of the inundation to old infrastructure. And where will this money come from? As a real estate broker, liability for the drastic changes in property values is a big question. Who's going to be liable? As a real estate broker, if somebody says, oh, well, you knew they were going to put this road in, and then yet you sold me this house. How am I supposed, who am I going to sue you guys? I mean, there are a lot of questions of liability. When they put the pipeline through Levy County, the Sims house out there was a single family concrete block home, beautiful home. They built the pipeline 100 yards from the house, hasn't sold in 3 years. As far as new jobs, look at Suncoast Parkway. You got a few hamburger joints and gas stations along on the exchanges. That's it. And as far as $64 million a mile, when our schools, our local schools, can't buy books or pencils and paper, where are the priorities of this administration calling themselves conservative? I am a fiscal conservative, and I believe that dollars would be better spent trying to fix your infrastructure down in South Florida, which is going to be wiped out. My son lives in Fort Lauderdale. I see the videos every day of the water coming up and up and up into the highways. And you've got to think of the future. And this is not necessarily thinking of the future. When evacuations come, people use 1998. The rest of the time, it's wide open. So I ask you to please take those items that I've mentioned into consideration, and I thank you for listening.
Thank you. Herman, you're up. If I may, and then Karen Esty. No, go ahead.
Hello, my name is Herman Younger, and I'm here representing the Sierra Club. We are one of 75 organizations and businesses in the No Roads to Ruin Coalition. We were recently told by FDOT that no path or course would be determined until the guiding principles were established by the respective task forces. We were surprised yesterday when we learned that a mayor of a community in the area of the potential Suncoast Parkway extension has been shown a likely pathway for the toll road by DOT representatives. So I ask you, how is that possible when the guiding principles have not been finalized? And if someone is getting an idea where FDOT is prematurely planning to send these unneeded toll roads, why is the public being left out? Where is the transparency? Thank you.
Next is Renee. I believe she's next.
Good afternoon. My name is Renate Cannon. Mr. Chairman, members of the task force, I'm happy to talk to you. Before I go anywhere else, all of Levy County, all, A-L-L, should be not only in the pink, but in the magenta on your map. We don't need this toll road. What we need is water resources. I came from the state of Texas, where I would be happy to return to. That state has only one natural lake. Everything else is man-made. I work for the Texas Water Development Board. That's what you're going to have here. Florida Water Development Board, because your roads will destroy any water that is left in the state. You can give us vocational training. That, like Commissioner Meek stated earlier, will give us assistance. And one other thing, you will not give us a 4-lane highway to the hospitals in Gainesville, but you want to build these toll roads. This is the outrage of the century. And for the previous speakers this morning, I do rather have the flies in this building because I know where they come from. And I don't want rooftops and houses apart a towel switch. That doesn't fit you, but obviously you all want to eat synthetic pelts because there will be no agriculture left. And if you cannot stop the evil of building these roads at my taxpayer dollars, then please take the advice of my husband who sits in that chair over there in the red jacket, fifth generation Floridian. He's the reason why I'm in this state. A good wife follows her husband. And I mind you, if you have to build the messy road at an exorbitant cost, then let's do it this way. No exit in all of Levy County. That will keep our EMS assessments where they are now. And then our chief doesn't have to worry about it when the next wreck is going to come. Thank you for listening. I appreciate it.
Next we have Karen Esty, and then Karen Guerin, and Donald Lane.
Thank you, board members, for this arduous task you've had before you, and I'm sure you have many more to come. But as all the other speakers prior to me, I actually agree with them 1,000%. We have roads in this state that are desperately need to be completed. Thousands and millions of dollars. We have people living in congestion. Hillsborough County had to stop permitting for a few days or a few months. You know why? Because of overdevelopment. They have no roads, no schools to handle what's coming that has already been built. And one of the reasons for that is there's no concurrency laws in this state that was gutted when Governor Scott was here. And that's why we have issues in every one of our counties. We're completely playing catch up every time something comes up. You have development after development, and then we don't have money to pay for the infrastructure. We don't have money to pay for schools or anything else that is community service, fire, police, rescue, hospitals, and it goes on and on and on. And it's just a domino effect up the state, up the state, up the state. If you go to like Safety Harbor, it was on the news the other day. They have an intersection that's already on their priority list for 2025. So it's on a priority list, but guess what? It's not even going to be able to be funded. So they're going to be put off probably to 2030 before anything can be done, and you're going to have more people at that intersection killed. Then let's talk about agriculture. I come from Redland in Southgate. I spent 22 years down there fighting to keep agriculture as it's present. Also, we fought for conservation of water issues, and we fought for the National Everglades National Park, and for everything that it supports. And that's an awful lot. But you know, over time, what's happened is you have development that's just unbridled development, and then they say, oh, well, we're going to have roads put in, roads put in. You soon you put a road in, and then you have more houses. So everything keeps feeding on itself. So if we don't protect our agriculture land to feed our communities, to feed our state, and to feed this nation, and then if we don't conserve water, like our other speakers have said, we are going to be in a very serious situation, because water is going to be our next gold rush in this state. We've also had water issues at the Florida-Georgia line. There's big lawsuits that went on. People forget about those things. You remember when Lake Okeechobee went dry a couple of times for droughts? We need to plan for these issues to come forward in our state. And being a fourth generation Floridian, I just see things that doesn't need to happen. This road doesn't need to come through this county. You need to keep things pristine where you have open land, open space. But the one thing that needs to really go on is that concurrency issue. If you don't put that back in, then it's going to just be runaway development again. And if you don't have a very serious comp plan in place in your county, you better start getting one now, because it's going to be too late. Thank you.
So next we have Karen Guerin, Donald Lane, and then Jim Wheeler. Karen, if you can, your county of residence.
Hi, my name's Karen Guerin. I'm from Gainesville, Alachua County, and I've been a resident there since the mid-70s. And I've been, Florida's been a second home to me since the mid-60s. Probably longer than a lot of you guys have been alive. And I really want to thank you guys all for coming in today and working so hard on making our voices heard, your constituents, and trying to get across to the DOT. The proposed multimodal tollway corridor system is not needed or wanted by the majority of residents in the impacted areas of the study system. The justifications for the project include, number one, alleviation of congestion. And I would counter that argument by saying that road construction promotes urban expansion and development, and it leads to a vicious cycle. More development leads to more need for road expansion. Number two, the emergency evacuation routes. And I would counter that with studies that have shown that rather than trying to evacuate people, it's much better to shelter in place. Number three, that for freight transport. And it's very unlikely that freight travel and trucks are going to use a tollway system. It's better to expand the existing rail systems. The reasons for canceling the project are, number one, to save money. It would be much better spent on education. The primary support for the system comes from a few legislators who would stand to profit, make large amounts of profit. Number two, the adverse impacts to our natural environments, increased road kills. Just as Jennifer Stoltz neglected to recognize the most significant trail system here in the state, the Florida National Scenic Trail. The DOT doesn't recognize the Florida Wildlife Corridor. They've renamed it something called the Florida Ecological Greenway Network. Although the DOT says public comment is encouraged, there's no format for getting feedback. Meeting venues are remote. Weekdays are not accommodating to working people. The slides or copies are unavailable, except on the website. Afterwards, the posters are confusing and not accessible. We don't trust the DOT and the state to protect our natural resources or to be fiscally responsible. Over and over again, we've seen regulatory tools neglected, example the BMPs, and resource management based on sound science subverted to politics and corporate funding. The corridor system proposed was initially segmented to avoid the EISs of a combined system.
Thank you. Next we have Donald Lane. Is it Kim Wheeler? And then Sarah Gledhill.
Good afternoon. Everybody here? I was born and raised here. This is my home. I showed livestock in this building in high school. I taught kids how to show livestock as an ag teacher for 25 years in this building. So when there's something up that's this important, that there's any possibility of us losing our way of life, folks, I'm going to be here. From listening to the comments earlier, I don't know if you have the funding to build this project or not. You need to get that straight first before you do all this planning. As a farmer today, retired teacher, a farmer, I don't go into growing a watermelon crop without knowing I got money to do it with. And I don't understand how the state can do things like this. If you don't know that you got the bonds there to do it with, and that there's any possibility that that money could be pulled and put somewhere else, that won't work. And I'll come back to that a little later. But the state doesn't have a real good, for me, the way I look at things, a real good track record. As a former teacher, I saw the FCAT Seemed like every 10, 15 years we had a different system thrown in to teach by. None of them ever worked that great because we never stayed on it long enough to get it to work. A lot of times funding was pulled and it hurt to know that you got kids that you care about and that you can't do the job you need to be able to do because you don't have a resource to do it with. I don't think a lot of the people in the Department of Education, I don't have very good opinions of them because of the programs that the way they dictated us what we had to do in terms of to do our job under was impossible. You can't get it done that way. I'm a firm believing that before you throw in something or you create another program or another project, that take care of what you got and do it right. You know, I've seen the time when teachers' performance in the classroom was based upon FCAT scores and your classes were stuck with low achievers. What chance do you have to try to show improvement? And you had to move in so many points for your evaluation to be satisfactory. I went for 7 years without a raise. And I wasn't the only one because of state funding. Okay, another thing, I know that our county depends on state funding. We have roads, secondary roads right now that are in terrible shape. Talking to a county commissioner, well, we applied for state to get help here, and not this year, maybe next year, well, maybe not this year, to go again. So I don't know whether we'll ever get them fixed or not.
Thank you, Mr. Lane.
Okay, well, let me tell you something. I got a little farm out here I've worked hard on all my life.
Mr. Lane?
And if you want to put a road through it, you come on. It'll be
Thank
through
you.
my cold, dead hands.
We have Tim Wheeler, Sarah Gladhill, and Harriet Jones.
Most importantly, I'm asking for a no build. My name's Kim Wheeler. I live in rural Levy County. I'm opposed to the toll road because the rural character, our livelihood, is changing far too quickly. These rural areas provide livelihoods, peanuts, watermelon, cattle, and horses. And not only are they great agricultural lands, but they have incredible beauty, enhancing the scenic county roads that lead to ecotourism centers such as Cedar Cave and our nature coast. Once this is destroyed, once our unique and beautiful landscape is developed, it will be gone forever. And it's this incredibly diverse environment that draws both tourists and future residents. Do we really want to lose what it is we are so blessed to have? I love Florida, and I do not want us to be so short-sighted and overly quick implementing this plan. FDOT has processes that they use with Wakiva that they're not using at this time because of legislation that has created this mess that we're dealing with. The requirement for new corridors was to first determine need, ensure that the project is consistent with statewide, regional, and local policies related to growth, identify environmental resources, and develop a plan for moving forward. But CORES, I know you guys are working hard at this, it has done none of these things. There's been no transportation planning process to determine whether the proposed roads meet these initial requirements. CORES promises a lot of things, but it's not delivering. We don't need a toll road to have internet, broadband. It's not going to be that way anyway. It's going to be a new system. Think ahead. We have climate change. We have so many other infrastructure issues that we need to be dealing with. And on top of that, we have 2 state roads that are more than adequate. State roads 19 and 27 are not crowded. 1998 close to Tampa is, but not in this general area, and they are more than sufficient for our current and near future needs. I'm mostly concerned about the time frame of this bill. A task force report by October 1st, 2020, we're not doing too well with that one,
construction no later than December 31st, 2022, and open to traffic no later than December 31st, 2030. This is both impractical and arbitrary. Lee Constantine, one of the architects of the Wakiva Parkway, states the necessary improvements for a thorough process, quote, might slow down the end course process, but the wealth of resources at risk from the expressway, fragile waterways, wetlands, wildlife corridors, working farms, and rural communities are more than worth any time and trouble.
Thank you.
Thank you. No bill, please.
Next, we have Sarah Gledhill, Harriet Jones, then Janet Barrow.
Sarah Gledhill, I'm with the Center for Biological Diversity. I live in St. Johns County, and I want to thank all of you that are still here to listen to the individuals that have come out today, and a lot of folks that have been sitting in these bleachers with you all day long, so we feel the pain that the day is going on. Earlier today, the panel was discussing a few things, and I mentioned I'm from St. Johns County, and I could have sworn I felt like I was listening to a similar story, a very cautionary tale about St. Johns County when the gentleman was talking about Pasco, and all the ranches were consumed by rooftops. St. Johns County, one of the fastest growing counties in the state of Florida, very similar situation, except for we had rural civiculture consumed by rooftops. And we had to catch up. There was a moratorium placed on growth because the roads could not handle all of the cars. The difference between Pasco County and St. Johns County is a tax referendum that passed in Pasco County. St. Johns County had a tax referendum and it failed because the citizens weren't going to tax themselves anymore. Pasco County has a penny for Pasco that they have passed, they've continued to renew it. So those citizens tax themselves. The elected officials here today, this is a cautionary tale. Are you prepared to run a campaign to tell your citizens to increase their taxes voluntarily? I'm paid to be here today. I think it is more important for you to hear from folks like Donald Lane and the other citizens that are from this region. So I have 3 suggestions that are for FDOT, but I would like for the task force members to hear them. It was mentioned earlier to have all of the public comments available for you all in a qualitative and a quantitative manner. I also want to suggest if there are any comments coming in from your fellow task members, that those letters, comments, discussions are made available to you as a task force member so you know what the conversation is going on with these staff. They mentioned that the staff can get information to you. I would ask that that be added to the list so that you know what the conversations are and the concerns. Secondly, the availability of materials on the website. I did see that it would be made available for this meeting later. Yesterday's meeting was available at 2 p.m. today, approximately. That's pretty late. I know you guys want to see the information available a little bit earlier too. So I would suggest to FDOT that the materials be made available on the website for the public to consume with a minimum of 24 hours of the meeting, not after the meeting. And additionally, we don't get to see these AMY principles, what y'all were talking about. We have no idea. We don't have access to it. Last but not least, please archive these videos. I know that the Florida Channel has an archive, but now that Florida Channel is not airing these, that FDOT has an archive of videos on the website so that we can watch these and the public can watch this and get better engagement of all stakeholders. Thank you.
We have Harriet Jones next, Janet Barrow, and David Biddle.
Good afternoon. My name is Harriet Jones. I'm from Levy County, and I just can't understand why you'd want to have where you have congestion somewhere, you want to move the congestion 30, 40 miles further out into the Gulf. One of our commissioners also mentioned that you were supposed to be discussing no build today. They were actually discussing that down at Belle Glade last month. I saw it on the Florida Channel. And they said, well, there'll be a consensus for it. Well, we're a rural community and we like rural lands. For one thing, upkeep, our infrastructure doesn't have to be as complicated or expensive for our citizens. And that's why we have a lot of low-income citizens here. But in New Hampshire, I heard them discussing it yesterday. their unemployment rate is something like 2.2%, but the people are working 2 jobs, they say up there. And once again, the economy's doing great, but people can't afford housing. And they're still taking money out of our housing trust fund, the Sadowski Fund, to build and support infrastructure for roads. Now, why do they have to take money that would support 30,000 new jobs and $4 billion worth of work for our state to put it into more concrete and wreck an ecosystem that is close to being natural if we have clean water, and our legislature still doesn't provide any active support for clean water? Thank you.
Thank you. Next we have David Biddle. I'm sorry, are you Janet? I'm sorry. You come on. No, you were right. I had moved them around. Sorry. Janet, David Biddle, then Emma Turner.
Okay, Janet Barrow from Marion County. We're in agriculture. I just wanted to let y'all know prime farmland is a USDA designation, so don't assume that all agricultural land is going to be prime farmland. There's a lot of valuable farmland as recharge and wildlife habitat and such that is not designated as prime farmland. Some of it is also very karstic where you want to put roads through. And MCORES is not going to help us getting our cattle to market. We market through video auction and we have our shipping down. So, you're not going to benefit us there in the cattle business, at least us anyway. So, this is the outrage of the century, and it's making Florida kind of a laughing stock. It makes no sense to do these roads. You're getting kind of ahead of the game. So somebody paid a study, and we have 900 people supposedly moving to Florida every day. Maybe so, but are these trends going to continue? Look at the economy right now and what's happening to the cruise industry, what's happened to some of the tech investments and such, and places like the Villages and other developments. Is this where the next generation is going to want to live and move, or are they going to become ghettos, So these projects are hugely expensive, and I appreciate Charles Lee for bringing up some of the numbers. They're unwarranted, getting ahead. Look at the I-4 Ultimate project, and the company that's building it, they've run into all kinds of problems. They never want to do a project in the United States again. That's a company from Sweden. So we've all probably heard of Patrick Smith's book, A Land Remembered. Well, I'm getting enough material for a book, A Land Exploited, and that's Florida.
Thank you. David Biddle.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is David Biddle. I'm a resident here of beautiful Gilchrist County. One thing I do want to say is I'm obviously going to be the outlier of the speakers today. First thing, we don't build roads for today. We build roads for future use. And we do have 900 people a day moving to the state of Florida. Florida needs to be ready for the incoming millions of people that are going to be coming to the state. It's irresponsible to not be preparing our infrastructure in the state for the incoming amount of people. That's not going to stop. They're not going to stop coming. We need to be ready. Also, as far as evacuation routes, we do need more evacuation routes. North-south is very limited on non-stop highways. You've got 95 and 75. Give you an example. My daughter attended Florida Gulf Coast University in 2017 when the hurricane that came on the southwest coast, I can't remember which name that was, but when they evacuated the school, it took her 10 hours to get home because there was no access. She had to take back roads all the way home. And she wasn't the only one because all the roads were so congested. Then we saw it right here in Gilchrist County. 129 was just non-stop car for days of people trying to get out of South Florida. So the infrastructure in the state needs it. On top of that, our rural counties are an economic desert. We have no opportunity here, very limited opportunity for our students. You look here in Gilchrist County, we're consistently one of the top 5 school districts in the state, but there's no opportunity. We educate the kids and then they leave. Not saying a highway will guarantee to bring jobs, but it has a potential to bring industry to the area, which is much needed. Also, toll roads are one of the best ways to go about this because it's a user fee. The users who use it are going to be the ones paying it, and that helps alleviate some of the burden off of the taxpayers. As far as rural way of life, I love our rural way of life, and I don't see where a road would stop that. Suwannee County has I-10 going through it. Baker County has I-10. They're still extremely rural counties. It hasn't changed that one bit, but it has brought them more opportunity for their areas. Thank you.
Thank you. We have 3 final cards here. Emma Turner, McKenna Lang, and Amy Datz. If you all can also remind us the county that you live. Go ahead.
Howdy. My name is Emma Turner. I'm an 18-year-old from Gainesville, Alachua County. I'm here to once again remind y'all of our obligation to protecting shared natural resources. As one of many voices in my generation, I beg you, please consider the alternatives. Not enough creative action has been taken in addressing automobile traffic on interstate highways to merit the construction of a new multi-billion-dollar infrastructure project. Eliminate highway bottlenecks, widen exit ramps, pave shoulders, incorporate speed harmonizations, install breakdown lanes, encourage group travel by installing HOV lanes, retrofit existing roads to accommodate trucking traffic. Any of these modifications would be less expensive, more effective, and less damaging to precious ecosystems than the CORES, for which congestion mitigation is listed in the language of the Senate bill as one of the intended benefits of the project. The CORES are an uncreative, uninspired, and unwanted response to traffic on Florida highways. My generation will oversee the transition to clean energy, and with it, a revolution in our method of travel. Toll roads will become antiquated relics very quickly. It is simply not a viable long-term investment of public funds. I'm worried about the implications of this project for future generations, for your children and your grandchildren. Will they only know fractured ecosystems? Will they only live in weakened communities? Will they become comfortable with international developers infiltrating the fabric of their neighborhoods? Corporations that exploit the most vulnerable and benefit only the most wealthy. Speaking not only as a taxpayer, but as a generation to inherit Florida's future, I'm urging you, don't waste my money or my time. If this construction is permitted, these toll roads will become another ecological mess, the effects of which your children and grandchildren will become responsible for cleaning up. Don't force the words, "I told you so," into our mouths. Make no mistake, the CORES have no place in any future we want. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. McKenna Lang.
Hi, my name is McKenna Lang. I'm 17 years old and I'm from Gainesville, Alachua County. I'm concerned about the financial realities of the CORES project. The construction of these toll roads costs billions of dollars over the course of a decade of public funds. Once completed, taxpayers are then expected to pay tolls on this private road to avoid the horrible traffic of interstate highways. The Florida Department of Transportation has decided that 300 miles worth of new road is the only solution to the interstate highway's numerous issues. Personally, I disagree and would like to see an alternative that is less costly, not only to Florida's taxpayers, but also its environment. I want this to be very clear. Florida taxpayers did not ask for the CORES, and in fact, I am one of many Florida citizens that opposes these toll roads. Consider that these toll roads will not only be costly to construct, maintain, and repair when damaged, but their overall costs will also be amplified by the money involved with environmental restoration and rehabilitation as an after effect. So in case y'all missed it, we do not want these toll roads. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Hi. My name is Amy Datz. I live in Leon County, and I'm 67 years old. I wanted to say, when you do your criteria for how you choose your roadway, I wanted to encourage you to consider elevation because we are having sea level rise. And I noticed on one of your maps that 19 will be underwater eventually. And I'm assuming 95 will also be pretty close to underwater. 76% of our population lives on the coastline. and they will probably have to move off the coastline and move to the center and north of Florida. So I'd like you to consider elevation as one of the major criteria for your choices when you choose where you're going to place this roadway. Also, I don't think a lot of you understand the concept of a toll road. The concept is Leon County wants to have 100% renewable by 2035, 2050. I would encourage all of you to ask your counties to be 100% renewable by 2035 or 2050. The way that we pay for roadways today is every time I buy a gallon of gas, $1 of which goes to the Highway Trust Fund, 75 cents comes back to Florida. If I buy a gallon of gas in Wyoming, $5 comes back to Wyoming. Why is that? Because Wyoming you have to transport goods from the breadbasket of America to the coast. In Florida, and everywhere in the country, the money comes back from the money you put in your gas tank that goes to the federal government, comes back to the resident at the rate of the residents, not at the rate of the use. So there's 21 million Floridians, but 121 million visitors, or 125 million visitors. Those 125 million visitors are not paying for our roads, but they're using them, they're tearing them up. And we need to have some way to have them pay for those roads that they come to our state and use. The money that they put into the tolls will stay in Florida and can stay in the counties where the road is built. That is the concept of why we're moving to toll roads rather than free roads that we've had up to this point, because the trust fund is collapsing. And if we don't have toll roads, we won't have roads.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, that concludes the speaker cards for today.
All righty. Thanks for the public comment. Thanks for hanging with us all day. Thanks for the task force also hanging with us all day for some very good comments, input, discussion. I think that will just keep getting more entertaining as we go along, which is a good thing. Passion is a good thing. If continuity is kind of key to this, but if you need to, if you're going to miss a meeting, let us know so we can, as we've done, we can keep track of who's coming or going with the meeting. Again, the notes will be hanging on the website. The presentation soon, obviously not soon enough. We will work on that. Reminder on sunshine. I think we've talked that to death.
I'm sorry.
Here I am talking again, but there was some comment in the public comments that if you got any input about the roads that was sent to you, to send it to each other. Again, that would be a violation of sunshine, but I wanted to add as well that it may be a good idea for you to send it to board staff. The reason being, if it's anything in writing, it's going to constitute a public record, and there's a retention for that. If you send it to staff, they'll take care of it. You don't want to have to be worrying about retention schedules yourself. So please don't send it to each other, but if you want to, send it to board staff.
Thanks.
And can I ask that the presentations be emailed to each one of us on this task force beforehand, along with the agenda for future meetings?
Mr. Chairman, on the earlier item, if folks want to send things, I'm Jennifer Stoltz, production lead. My name and number and email are on pretty much all the materials, so folks are welcome to send materials to me.
And we will do our best to do that, Kathy. There's often changes going to the very last minute is what we struggle with. But yeah, we clearly need to get you guys information sooner. We appreciate that. And so hopefully we'll have that to you before the March 25th meeting. That's the next meeting back in Ocala. Open house on the 26th. Where is that one? College of Central Florida at Levy. You are almost certainly invited to go to those. That's not a mandatory thing, but you're most certainly welcome to go. There are some evaluation cards in your packets. We appreciate any input you've got on how we might make these meetings more effective. And with that, everybody's anxious to get out of here, so this meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.